have the pleasure of being here with the wonderful Debra Hendricks, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for being here. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, it's an honor to be here, James. Thank you so much. I was actually very fortunate to be in education for over 23 years, and around 18 of those years were in administration, with the latter part of my experience being a school superintendent. So I'm former superintendent for Sylvan District, and so I've been able to be in many seats and wear many hats in education, both in the classroom and as an administrator. So I'm really glad to be here and share some of my experience with you.
I'm sure in all that time in education, you've seen lots change in various aspects, but technology specifically being one of those. I'm curious what you've experienced and what are some of your thoughts now?
Oh, well, starting out years ago with school and technology, we were lucky just to have blackboards and whiteboards. When we got whiteboards in fully in all the classrooms, that was pretty spectacular. And just to think where education's come now, where of our students that are in the classroom, starting with age 5, know more than a lot of the adults do when it comes to working with technology. So that's something that's been a learning curve for some. And for others, they've just gotten right on board and been able to do some spectacular things, not only in the classroom, but where we are in education right now with at-home learning and virtual learning. There are a lot of adults that was a big challenge for them to take, and they're working at many levels.
Yes, it's such an integral part of education and society as a whole. I'm curious, what specific things from an administrator level, were there things that kept you up at night? Or I'm sure some of this flies over your head as us in technology have acronym soup many times. And it gets comical at some points, but it's very serious because it's so reliant. You're being able to teach students is reliant on this technology working. So exactly. I'm curious, what were some of those things that kept you up at night or maybe you weren't quite sure about?
Well, when you're a superintendent, you mainly focus on what are the devices that the teachers have in their hand to be able to put together a good instructional program and delivery for students. And so you think about it in those terms. And then you start realizing the additional devices that's needed, not only for the teacher, but also for the students. And so you're still really thinking more on an educational delivery model. And then you have something happen, which I've experienced as a former superintendent, when you really have to start thinking about security. And the way that happened for me personally wasn't something that I had staff members coming to me necessarily and putting together a plan. It was an actual cyber attack, which stopped everything in our school district for months. But when that happened, it was something that was so foreign that we didn't even know how to react or where to even start with that process. So that made me, as a school superintendent, really look at it in a different mindset, because the minute that happens, when you're talking about the security, you're talking about every single adult that works on your campuses and every student and their identity and what that liability is for a school district, and how that just all of a sudden what we were looking at just in an instructional mode now makes us start thinking about it differently.
And you feel for the impact that it has on parents and students and staff and morale. And that's one of the sides that we see in security on Datapath is you can't do security retroactively. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. We know that a great partnership is important. But you touched on something that I think is true to Datapath is we've always taken a stance that education should lead technology. Technology should not lead education. That being said, we also know teachers don't have time to prepare a technological version of a lesson plan and a offline version. And so you're so dependent on that technology. After a cyber event such as that, what would you have done differently?
Well, school education, in the sense of having funding, there's a point in time when you're looking at your funding, and of course, for school districts, so approximately over 85% of their funding goes to human beings. And because you can buy any program that you want in the world, but if you don't have the right teacher in the classroom, kids aren't going to be successful. So I think for so long we looked at our money and looked at saving money in areas that we thought were not important until you need to deal with something such as a cyber attack. So I think it's twofold right now. The school districts are really needing to look more for that security piece, because there's not a school district that I'm aware of, honestly, that has some type of expert technology department that can focus on cybersecurity, the networking, the wireless, voice, right? So that's so much. And how do you recruit and retain something of that level and caliber to be able to monitor your cybersecurity as a school, number one? And then how do you keep all the devices up, right?
Yeah.
Because if the devices aren't up, then you have problems of going into that, your security is under attack. So I think school districts have to look at it twofold. It has to be more of a focus on security, but also, do we have enough devices? Are we maintaining our devices? What happens with the tickets that come through? Because you can have all the devices that you need, but if you don't have the right support, you're not going to be able to maintain that level.
And that's where it is. It's such a great partnership, and we enjoy that. When we're looking at it with, especially a district, we know in so many conversations, the heart is there for the students. Everyone is there for the students. We're there for the students. But it really does take a team, and there's so many different expertises that are required now, and many of them aren't necessarily a full-time position in these niche expertise, but you do need internal staff with that intrinsic knowledge of the organization. And when you find that collaboration, and that's what we really enjoy, is working with those existing IT teams and building and adding and planning with the superintendent and with the board and the community. It really does align to make a difference.
It does. And just going to that first point of your assessment to see what you really need, but when you're doing the planning, it's the long-term version. And so having someone such as Datapath that are experts, they can really help a school district see that long-term plan. And how do you get there? And even what's more, I think, critical is that coming along as a partner, sometimes you're more aware of funding that's out there than a school district may be. And so, what's the appropriate place to put your funding to get you to your long-term goal? And that's not something that school districts usually have the knowledge base to make all those decisions alone.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how overwhelming with everything that's changed just in learning in general. With Common Core changes and everything else. And I think sometimes in IT, that's the world we live in, we assume, why aren't people thinking about these things? And it's just a very miniature part of what your total grand scheme picture is.
Exactly.
But that's where we leverage and should be coming along as a partner, and do come along as a partner, to shine some light on some areas. Because unfortunately, when you have an event like that, or, years ago, we'd say, backups aren't important until they're important.
Right.
So,
because we'll patch and we'll fix and we'll do this, right? Because we don't want to spend all the money there right now. But in the long term, it's much more costly. Much more costly.
And some things you can't put a price tag on with some of what it does to just overall morale and the disruption and some of those things.
Or a student's identity being stolen. That's most of and that's, I believe, is why, and everything that you read, school districts are one of the number one targets right now, because if you can get a hold of a juvenile's identity, sometimes that's not even known until many years later. So that's critical for school districts. And I know for a fact in the breach that we had, it was brought in by an employee. So that's another aspect, is educating everyone in that organization about, we thought we were doing great in areas until we find out that complex passwords aren't being used, or people are taking their devices home and hooking them up in ways that then they get bugs, and then they bring it back to your school district. There's just so much that you're right. You don't have time to focus on all of the aspects of security.
Yeah, and that's something David Darmstandler, my business partner, and I have talked about. And what a lot of people don't realize is behind the scenes. I mean, I see how much heart there is in these board meetings and things that are really people care. They really do.
Right.
And one of the things that is real mission-based for us at Datapath that's core to David and I is it matters to us. This isn't just a, hey, this is a service that Datapath offers. If you're a underprivileged student, in particular, or any student, and you've had your identity stolen and you go to get your first car or you go to college or you're just trying to start out, you're already at such a disadvantage.
Right.
And so those are the things that matter to us. And so we say, hey, when we're doing this service, we're actually protecting students that has a way of really possibly changing some of the trajectory of their whole life. Were they able to go to school? Were they able to get that loan? And as we know, student data is much more valuable than yours and I's data, because if you're 13 and I steal your credit, you're probably not going to know for many years. So it's a high value target. And I think one of the common things we hear is, well, no one would target us. Why would they go after us? Well, one, the data is very valuable. And two, there's a mass amount of systems that are constantly scanning. Even if you're not targeted, you're definitely being scanned. I know I could say fortunately or unfortunately under the circumstances, this is how Datapath was able to engage with Sylvan, was you reached out to us when you were right in the throngs of this attack. And what was your experience with Datapath?
So reaching out to Datapath was day 2, and Datapath instantly came on board and came in and put every emergency process into place to at least halt what was currently going on while we could get things fixed and repaired and brought up to speed to prevent it to continue. And so we had minimum of usually 3 calls a day, like face-to-face calls. We did planning, we did next steps. So for the next 4 hours, we're going to do ABC, and then Datapath would come back on with the district, and then we would go to the next plan. And then every time there was something that needed to be put into place, Datapath knew exactly what to do because they'd researched it before the recommendation to the district, which not only saved us time, but it saved the district a lot of money to get through that emergency phase. Once we could get through the emergency phase, then Datapath was able to come on board with Sylvan and do a complete analysis and assessment on what we needed to do more long-term to prevent what had happened, and brought forth the emergency piece with the security breach.
And you touched on a piece that in those events, communication is key. And I definitely applaud you and the district for being so responsive and taking it so seriously. But there is a lot. I think you're surprised to say, okay, now we want to audit every account of every system to make sure backdoor accounts weren't set up. And when you start thinking of all the systems that are web-based and do or don't have two-factor authentication. And so even though we were able to quickly mitigate the emergency part of the attack, when you say that it took months, well, what takes months is just all that checking and making sure and the proactive planning and beefing up security going forward and educating staff. And so, again, it's always better to do that before.
Exactly.
But like I said, it's a new budget item, and we're very aware of that. And Datapath does constantly research what are some of the grants out there, what are some of the funding vehicles, because we know it is a new expense, but it's exponentially more to do it after the fact than before. But we always try to save as much money in the process, and we are thankful that you engaged with us, and it's been a fantastic working relationship. But I absolutely wish we hadn't met under those circumstances. So
It's true.
Deborah, I'm not sure if you're aware, I believe you are, there was recently, just here in the last few days, a major breach in Las Vegas. That was a little different than your attack, where it was very interrupted, but we were able to protect your data from being released.
Right.
But in this case, it was different. Student data was actually exposed and released. Had you heard about this situation? What are some of your thoughts?
I did, and I just thought that there's another example of someone could look at the school district and say, how could you let this happen? But honestly, it's never had to be a focus of school districts until recently. So it's unfortunate that happened. When you look at a case such as that, ransom right now from what I understand, they can ask for as much as they want.
Sure.
And so when you're a school district and you receive your funds, from public funds, then not only if you are in that position where you have to pay a ransom, that's taking away from everything that's going to go to the kids. Mm-hmm. So that's critical. So by having a partnership such as Datapath could truly allow a school district not to have to worry about that aspect and worry just on the instructional piece. Once you have the data out, we've talked before a little bit about the morale of your employees, about parents. Can you imagine being a parent and all of a sudden your child's identity has been stolen? I mean, that's just something that I can't even fathom the amount of emotion and energy that would go into a situation.
Yeah, that's one of the heartbreaking parts of what we do, and because of the confidentiality of it. In your case, we're able to talk a little bit about the event because it was made the paper and some of those things, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. But I can't tell you how many times we've had organizations literally in tears that their whole company may be shut down. Employees may sue their own company because their data's been lost. But I think this goes back to the proactivity and why it's so important. FBI advises in many cases, try not to pay the ransom. We're encouraging the attackers to do this. But when you're in a rock and a hard place of my data may be exposed and these students. And so at that point, there really isn't a great path. And the more we can prevent it, the better. And that's the thing with cybersecurity. It never sleeps.
Right.
It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, and it's constantly evolving. So it's not like the old days where, hey, just make sure our servers are patched. Someone needs to be monitoring this in real time. And what many people don't realize is, depending on the size of an organization, especially in school districts, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of logging events a day of all the websites going and all the calls that they make out. And now all these devices are at home. So who's watching that? Because I guarantee you, if you're not watching it, the attackers are watching it.
Exactly. And in my opinion, K-12 education will never go back to the way it used to be. And so you're absolutely right. When you talk about the increase in devices, the increase of devices going home, the access points that multiply because of it, I don't know how a school district will do what they've been able to do in the future without having experts, such as through a partnership. And we also know that by education not going back, I mean that in a good way as well, because right now we are working with students that we're preparing them for careers and jobs that don't even exist right now. And so we cannot go back to the old way we were doing things. So by having the exposure to technology, it actually will enhance our students' learning. And so with that, when schools are able to open and kids are back in the classroom, it's going to be exciting to see what teachers are already learning and how they can take what they've been doing at the virtual level, just enhancing that more. Even though they'll have seat time with their students, they can front load, they can do virtual tours of any place you want to go in the world. They can enhance that, challenging that child that is ready to be challenged. And when teachers are having 35 in a classroom and you're trying to meet all the needs, just think about now what we're learning and what we can expand upon with technology to even increase the success of all the kids in our classroom.
That's why I love our conversations. I always learn from you so much, and that's a great perspective on it and some of those things I hadn't even thought of. But you're absolutely right, and a great way of taking this time to not just reflect, but react in a way that's actually going to positively change some students' outcomes and outlay.
Right.
Great.
Yeah. So as a former superintendent and going through working with with Datapath and realizing the value of having that partnership with an outside entity that have the experts in hand. One thing that I'm currently working with is superintendents in other districts, and also just private business as well, on the whole concept of leadership and how when you have the many aspects of focus of leadership, looking at all that can be building, not only building your team, but looking at, are you working with your IT department, like in superintendents with school districts, just to see and ask questions and make them aware if they're not already aware of what can happen to a district. So my focus right now is just to help others and try to give people as much information as possible. Hopefully they don't have the same experience.
Well, I can personally say you've always been a tremendous leader here in the community, and many of us have looked up to you for so many years. And so now that you are in your new phase and recreating yourself in some ways, the knowledge that you're sharing, I definitely know will impact and help so many districts and organizations in general. I've never been to schools where I've had such mature young men and women at grade school level greet you, and everybody has a role and a job, and they make eye contact and the soft skills, and you definitely have created a great culture in every organization you've been a part of. So we're happy to continue to get to work and collaborate with you as you have an impact on those organizations. And any way Datapath can support you in what you're doing, we're more than happy to do so.
Thank you. I look forward to our future endeavors.
Likewise.